The voices on the late-night radio. My name is Patricia Sullivan, and I'm 43 years old. I work as the night shift radio host for WCAP-FM, a late-night talk and music station based in a small city in upstate New York. And the night I received a series of phone calls during a severe thunderstorm from callers describing missing persons. In detail was the night I discovered that someone was using my radio show to deliver messages that no one else was meant to understand. Before I begin, if you work in broadcasting at night, always record your calls and document the callers. Keep listening, because the pattern I discovered through those phone calls would lead me to understand that someone had been watching the radio station, watching the news reports we aired, and had something they desperately needed the world to know. I had been working the night shift at WCAP-FM for about 6 years. The shift ran from 10 in the evening until 6 in the morning. During those hours, I took live calls from listeners. Some wanted to talk about current events. Some wanted to share their personal stories. Some just wanted to hear a human voice in the middle of the night. The late-night radio show attracted a certain type of person. People who were awake at unusual hours. People who were struggling with something. People who found comfort in being able to talk to someone, even if that someone was a stranger on the radio. The station was located in a small 2-story building downtown. The broadcast booth was on the 2nd floor. It had large windows that looked out over the main street of the city. I spent 8 hours a night in that booth, with nothing but my microphone and my phone lines, and the knowledge that thousands of people were listening to what I said. It was a responsibility that I took seriously. I was a voice in the darkness for people who needed to hear something real and genuine. The Thursday night I'm telling you about started like any other night. I came in at 9:30 to prepare for the show. I reviewed the news. I checked the weather forecast. I organized my talking points for the evening. At 10 o'clock exactly, I went on air. I did my standard opening. I welcomed listeners. I told them what was coming up. I took the first few calls from people who wanted to talk about various topics. By midnight, the weather had changed. The forecast that had predicted a possible thunderstorm was becoming a reality. The rain had started. The wind was picking up. Through the windows of the broadcast booth, I could see lightning illuminating the dark street below. The weather was getting worse as the night progressed. By 1 in the morning, the storm was in full force. The rain was torrential. The wind was howling. The lightning was nearly constant. It was dramatic and intense, and exactly the kind of weather that created an atmosphere for late-night radio. Around 1:30 in the morning, I took a call from a man. He said his name was Robert. He said he needed to tell me about something. He said he had been listening to my show for a long time. He said he had something important to discuss. I told him to go ahead. I was always interested in hearing what callers had to say. He said about 3 weeks ago a woman disappeared from the downtown area. He said her name was Emily Whitmore. He said she was 24 years old. He said she had been working as a waitress at a restaurant near the station. He said she had gone missing on a Tuesday evening. He said no one had seen her since. He said the police had searched. Her family had searched. But no one had found her. I remembered the case. It had been in the news. The local paper had run a story. The station had aired a report about the missing woman. Emily Whitmore had disappeared, and the circumstances were unclear. There was no evidence of foul play. There was no indication of where she had gone. She had simply vanished. The caller said the reason he was calling was that he had seen a report on the news that your station had aired. He said the report had shown a photo of Emily. He said the photo was being used to help find her. He said he was calling to tell me that he believed he knew what had happened to Emily Whitmore. I was suddenly very interested. I said, "What do you know?" The caller said he couldn't say everything on the air. He said there were things he couldn't discuss publicly. He said, "But I needed to know that Emily Whitmore is not coming home." He said I needed to know that she is gone. He said I needed to know that whatever happened to her, it was not an accident. I was trying to process what he was saying. A caller claiming to know something about a missing person. This happened sometimes. Most of the time it was someone with a theory or a rumor. Most of the time it led nowhere. But sometimes it led to real information. Sometimes callers on late-night radio knew things that the authorities didn't know. I said, "If you know something about what happened to Emily Whitmore, you need to contact the police." The caller said, "I'm calling you instead, because the police won't believe me." The caller said, "I'm calling you because I need someone to know the truth." The caller said, "I'm calling you because her death is going to be connected to other deaths, and people need to understand the pattern." Before I could respond, he hung up. The line went dead. He was gone. I sat in the broadcast booth stunned. I had no way to call him back. I had no way to get his number or his name verified. All I had was a recording of what he had said. All I had was the knowledge that someone was claiming to know something about a missing woman, and that person seemed to believe there was a pattern connecting multiple deaths. For the rest of that night, I couldn't concentrate on my regular show. I kept thinking about what the caller had said. I kept thinking about Emily Whitmore. I kept thinking about the phrase, the pattern. What pattern was he talking about? Was he saying that multiple women had gone missing? Was he saying that there was a serial situation? Was he saying something else entirely? By the time my shift ended at 6 in the morning, the storm had mostly passed. The rain was lighter. The wind had died down. The sun was starting to rise over the city. I drove home exhausted and confused. I couldn't stop thinking about the call. I came back to work the next night. The Thursday night had passed, and now it was Friday night. I was preparing for another show. I was hoping that the caller would call back. I was hoping that he would provide more information. I was hoping that I could get more details about what he was claiming. Around 1:15 in the morning on Friday, the phone rang. I answered, expecting maybe the same caller or a different caller with a similar story. But the voice on the other end was different. It was a woman. She said her name was Sarah. She said she was calling about something important. She said she knew about Emily Whitmore. She said she knew what had happened to her. She said Emily Whitmore was not the first person to disappear. She said there had been others. She said the others had disappeared over the course of several years. She said the station had aired news reports about all of them. I was starting to feel a sense of dread, a sense that something larger was being revealed. I said, "What do you mean, others?" She said there were at least 6 other people. She said they had all gone missing in the past 5 years. She said they had all been reported missing on local news. She said they had all been features on local broadcasts, including mine. I asked her for names. She gave me 4 names off the top of her head: Michael Chen, David Patterson, Jennifer Hayes, Robert Cortez. I recognized all 4 names. I recognized them because they had been missing person cases that the station had covered. They had been stories that had aired on the news. They had been people whose photos had been broadcast, asking for help from the community. The caller said the reason she was calling was that she believed there was a connection between all these disappearances. She said she believed they were not separate incidents. She said she believed they were connected by something or someone. She said she believed the person responsible for all the disappearances was listening to the late-night radio show. I said, "Why would you call the radio show if you think the perpetrator is listening?" She said, "Because I need you to understand what's happening. I need you to document this. I need you to record this conversation. I need there to be a record that someone warned the station about this pattern before something worse happens." The call ended. The line went dead. She was gone. I was left sitting in the broadcast booth with 2 strange calls in 2 consecutive nights. 2 callers claiming to know about missing persons. 2 callers claiming there was a pattern. 2 callers hanging up before I could get more information. I immediately went back through the station's archives. I searched for news stories about missing persons over the past 5 years. I found reports about all the people the callers had mentioned: Emily Whitmore, Michael Chen, David Patterson, Jennifer Hayes, Robert Cortez. All of them had been missing person cases. All of them had been reported on local news. All of them had disappeared without a clear explanation. All of them had been featured in news broadcasts at various times. But I also found more. I found other missing person cases that had been reported by the station over the years. I found photos of people who had disappeared. I found stories of families searching for their loved ones. I found a pattern of disappearances that stretched back further than the callers had mentioned. There were more than 6. There were at least 10 cases of people who had gone missing in the past 7 years. All of them had been reported by local media. All of them had been featured on broadcasts. I reported what I had discovered to my station manager. I told him about the phone calls. I told him about the pattern. I told him that I believed something was happening in our community that we needed to take seriously. The manager told me to gather all the information. He said he would contact the police. He said we needed to let the authorities investigate this properly. By the next week, the police had become involved. They had reviewed the recordings of my calls. They had investigated the pattern of missing persons. They had determined that there was indeed a possible connection between at least 5 of the disappearances. They had begun a task force to investigate the possibility of a serial abduction or murder situation. But here's what happened next. Here's what made the situation even more terrifying. 3 more calls came in over the course of the following week. All of them from different callers. All of them describing missing persons. All of them claiming to know something about what had happened. All of them providing details that were never made public. Details about how the people had disappeared. Details about what had happened to them. Details that only someone directly involved in the disappearances would know. The police monitored the calls. The police tried to trace the callers. But the calls were coming from burner phones. The calls were routed through various networks. The calls were impossible to trace. The callers were deliberate about not being caught. The callers were providing information, but in a way that couldn't lead back to them. Over the course of 2 weeks, I received 8 phone calls in total. 8 different callers. 8 different voices. But the same theme, the same message, the same pattern emerging. Someone or multiple someones were calling my radio show specifically to describe missing persons and to claim knowledge about what had happened to them. Someone was listening to my show. Someone was monitoring the station. Someone was using my platform to deliver information that they wanted documented and recorded. The police eventually determined that 5 of the 8 callers were describing cases that matched unsolved missing person cases in the area. The details they provided were accurate. The details had never been released to the media. The details could only have come from someone with direct knowledge of what had happened. But the police were never able to identify the callers. The police were never able to determine who was making the calls. The police set up a sting operation, but the callers stopped calling once they realized the police were monitoring the line. The callers disappeared just as mysteriously as the people they were describing. I continued working at the radio station for another year after the calls stopped. But everything had changed. I couldn't answer the phone without wondering if this would be another call describing a missing person. I couldn't read the news without looking for the names of people who had disappeared. I couldn't do my job the same way, knowing that there was someone out there who understood exactly how to use the radio show to communicate something that they wanted the world to know. Eventually, I decided to leave the job. I couldn't be the voice in the darkness anymore, knowing that darkness held people who were deliberately using my platform for their own purposes. I couldn't maintain the connection between the station and the listeners, knowing that some of those listeners had information about crimes and were choosing to deliver that information in cryptic ways to my show instead of going directly to law enforcement. Years later, 2 of the missing person cases were solved. Michael Chen was found deceased in a remote cabin about 50 miles from the city. David Patterson was found in a state park. Both cases were ruled suicides, but the details didn't quite add up. Both cases had connections to a man who had lived in the area and who had worked at various jobs around the community. A man who had eventually moved away. A man who was never charged with anything because there was never enough evidence to prove he had done anything wrong. But here's what still haunts me about those calls. Here's what I think about when I hear rain, and I think about late-night radio. The callers were trying to tell me something. The callers were trying to get information documented. The callers were trying to make sure that someone knew the truth about what had happened to those missing people. The callers understood that the police might not solve the cases. The callers understood that the system might fail. The callers understood that the only way to make sure the truth was preserved was to call a late-night radio show and speak it into the darkness. And the scariest part is this. The scariest part is knowing that someone was listening to my show so carefully that they knew exactly what information would matter. Someone was monitoring the news reports. Someone was tracking the missing person cases. Someone was studying the connection between the radio station and the community. Someone was watching and waiting for the right moment to call and deliver their message. I never found out who was calling. I never found out if it was one person or multiple people. I never found out if they were trying to help solve the cases or if they were trying to celebrate their crimes by describing them to the radio audience. I only know that during those 8 calls, 8 different voices delivered information about missing people that matched the facts of the cases, but that had never been made public. The rain that fell during those calls wasn't just weather. It was the backdrop for a series of confessions, or warnings, or celebrations, depending on how you interpreted them. The rain was the environment that created the atmosphere for late-night radio. The rain was the cover that allowed someone to call and describe things that should never have been described. So if you ever listen to late night radio, if you ever call into a show and speak to a host, please understand that your call is being recorded. Please understand that your call is being documented. Please understand that your call might be the evidence that solves a crime or prevents a tragedy. And please understand that someone might be listening to that same show, trying to understand what you're saying. Someone might be monitoring for patterns. Someone might be waiting for the next person to call and describe the next missing person. The calls eventually stopped coming. The pattern was broken. But I never stopped wondering if the people who called would call again. I never stopped wondering if there were more missing persons that hadn't been found yet. I never stopped wondering if the person or people behind the calls were still listening to late-night radio somewhere, still monitoring the broadcasts, still watching for the next opportunity to deliver a message to an audience of thousands of people listening in the darkness while the rain falls outside and the night stretches on. Every time I hear rain, now I think about those calls. I think about the voices describing missing people. I think about the pattern that I discovered, but could never fully understand. I think about how someone had deliberately used my platform to communicate something important. And I think about how terrifying it is to be the person chosen to receive those messages, to be the person entrusted with information about crimes, to be the person who becomes the conduit for messages from people who know things they can never properly share through normal channels. The relaxing sound of rain was not relaxing that night. The ambient sounds of the late-night radio show were not ambient at all. They were urgent. They were meaningful. They were messages from people who understood something about our community that the rest of us did not understand. And I carry that knowledge with me still. The knowledge that someone was listening. Someone was watching. Someone was using the late-night radio show to make sure that the truth about the missing people was recorded and preserved for whoever might need to know it in the future.